Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interviews, Jake Moshenko. Jake is a co-founder and the CEO at Authzed. Maybe I pronounced wrong, but Jake will improve my pronunciation. So Jake has been an innovator in the cloud-native ecosystem for over 15 years, and after engineering roles and at Amazon and Google, Jake founded Quay, the first private Docker registry, which was acquired by CoreOS. Jack then became an engineering leader at CoreOS, which was acquired by Red Hat and then by IBM. So he is now a co-founder and CEO of Authzed, the company commercializing the SpiceDB, the industry-leading cloud native permission database. So, Jack, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of improving application security through better authorization. But before that, could you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and what you guys at Authzed are up to these days?
Yeah, sure. You touched on a lot of it, but I guess I could just add a little bit of color. I grew up in the Midwest, Michigan specifically, to an entrepreneurial family. Both of my parents are business owners. I've always been a builder, always been an engineer at heart, always been a tinkerer. That led me to study engineering at University of Michigan. And then that led me out to Boeing in the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle region. I was in the flight simulators group, which was loads of fun. But ultimately, the siren song of big tech took me away to Amazon, which you covered a little bit. At Amazon, I was working on e-commerce platform. So that's all of the software distributed services that power Amazon.com, right? The retail shopping experience. That's where I really learned a lot about distributed systems and cloud systems and security, things like that. After that, I went to Google, where I worked on APIs infrastructure. So building things for developers to consume, which weaves very tightly into the narrative of how Authzed became a thing. And then, as you mentioned, at Google, that's where I met Joey, who's our current CTO and one of our co-founders. And we left to found the company that would ultimately create Quay. Quay was the first private Docker registry before Docker Hub was even a thing. And as part of that journey of building Quay, we kept running into this problem about how to do permissions right, how to do them securely, and how to do them flexibly. We ran into it over and over again. When we first launched the product, our very first feature request was, that's great, that's cool, but I need groups and organizations so that I can model what my business looks like in your product. And that's a really common refrain that we hear from customers all the time, which is, I had a set of ideas in mind when I created my product, and it turns out that those were insufficient, or those didn't meet what the market needs were for permissions. And then you're in this really tricky position of having to continually improve and create and refine your permission system. And because this is security code, it's very risky to make changes to your permission system. And so ultimately, our journey took us through CoreOS and Red Hat and IBM, like you mentioned. But ultimately, since we kept running into this problem, we decided to go and fix it once and for all. We created a company around the idea of fixing this risky, brittle, error-prone permissions code and replacing it with something that's better and independently testable and verifiable and flexible. And so that's kind of the mission that we've been executing ever since here at Authzed.
Fantastic. So let's discuss a little bit what you're doing, guys. So what is the authorization in the context of application security, and why is it crucial for protecting sensitive data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So authorization can largely be thought of as two parts. The one part is authorization around your workforce, like if you're a company. So you maybe have a bookkeeper, you maybe have a manager, employees, engineers, and all of those people need access to the company's data. So that's sort of the IT side of authorization. What we focus on is application authorization. So the products that you build and that you put in front of your customers and the way that they're interacting with your products, that's what we focus on, right? So helping you build better products, getting them to market faster, and saving time and resources in doing that. And as I mentioned a little bit in the intro, this is super important because that code is very tricky, it's very brittle, and it's very risky to make changes. There were actually features when we were building Quay that we were never able to ship because we were held back by the permissions model that we had chosen at the outset of the company. And this is a thing that companies deal with over and over again. They code something up to meet an existing set of requirements for permissions, and then customer requests come in, or the application starts scaling in a major way. And then 12 months later, they're back to the drawing board. They're back reimagining what their permissions need to look like for the next iteration of the company. And so we said, let's get out of that. Let's get out of that habit of rebuilding this every 12 months over and over again and replace it with something very flexible and bulletproof.
Mm-hmm. So what are some common challenges organizations face when it comes to implementing the robust authorization mechanism in their application?
Yeah, that's a great question. People have an idea that things should fit in a nice, clean tree, and everybody should have a very well-defined role, right? Like, you work for this team, or you're part of this team on our platform, and that team has these kinds of permissions to these sets of documents. But in reality, it's never quite that clean, right? And what you end up with is a lot of point-to-point sharing, or the roles that your application bakes in at the beginning are insufficient, and your customers want different roles or more fine-grained roles, or they want to grant access in a way that you never imagined. And so companies are constantly being dragged in directions that they never anticipated. A great example is when you get asked to add user-defined roles to your application. So let me give you an example. Are you familiar with Google Docs?
Mm-hmm.
So in Google Docs, you can share a document where you can say someone is a commenter, an editor, or a viewer, right?
Yeah.
But what if instead of just those three broad roles, what if you wanted to share just these two paragraphs, give someone editing access or commenting access on just these two paragraphs, or just these three subsections of a legal document? That's not something that you can currently do with the permissions that were imagined by the product managers at Google and built into the application. And so if Google had, let's imagine a 7 or an 8-figure contract with a big law firm to be able to offer that kind of functionality, they would need to go back to the drawing board and think about how to add that functionality into their existing permission system.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, Google is at the forefront of permission system research, and they published the Zanzibar paper, which is what our product is actually based off of. So at Google, they would just go and they would add a few lines of code in their schema. They would add a few things here and there, and they would be off to the races. But if you weren't Google, if you're everybody else out in the industry, you're embarking on a 1-year, 2-year long coding process where you're bringing in engineers and product managers and doing user design workflows, everything. It would be like almost shipping like a new product level of complexity. Mm-hmm. And so by having something more flexible under the hood, they can avoid having to do those massive rewrites all the time.
Mm-hmm. And is AI play some role in this product, or is it still different kind of product line?
Yeah, you really don't want an AI making permissions decisions for your company, because most AIs at this point are not explainable. So if you ask ChatGPT to write you a story about, I have kids, so they're always asking for stories about princesses and castles and flying horses and whatnot. If you ask it to write a story about that, it can do a really great job. But if you ask it to tell you whether someone should have access to something or not, it'll come back and it'll say yes or no. But if you're familiar with AI and LLMs, hallucinations are a big problem. So it might say yes, but not be able to explain why it said yes. Or if you ask for an explanation for why it said yes, it might just hallucinate that as well and retcon a whole, retroactively construct a whole reasoning for why it said yes. So when it comes to permissions and protecting and securing our most critical data, we really want it to be like a very deterministic, sort of like black and white decision tree about how access was granted, why it was granted. And we want that to be traceable and auditable, and all of what I call the CISO-ilities, right? Like auditability, traceability, because you don't want to like put an AI in charge of laissez-faire granting access to your secret data, right? The same way you probably wouldn't put an AI at the front door of a high-rise building and say, okay, you're in charge of security now. Same kind of concept. Where we see potential for AI in our industry are sort of like craftsmanship type roles, where we're potentially building custom integrations for customers where they say, I want a permission system that looks like this, and then we'll scaffold that out using AI. And then from there, they can take that and they can audit the model itself, right? Because the model itself is traceable and explainable and all of that. So they can take that and use that as a starting point or a scaffolding in order to be able to figure out exactly what they want.
Yeah, good explanation. So, because our audience mostly are risk and compliance people, so I would like to ask you a question. What is it for them about your product and what you do?
Yeah. When we were at CoreOS, we had a couple core philosophies that we sort of adhered to. And one of those was that with risk, you should minimize risk by doing smaller changes more frequently, right? So don't wait. In this case, it applied to the domain of an operating system. We had an operating system that you could update every day, every week. So you weren't waiting around for years and years for a major release of an operating system. But the same principle applies, right? You really want to make small changes, and you want to make small changes more frequently. And having a tool like ours, which is purpose-built and very specific around the domain of permissions, can give you a level of flexibility and a level of comfort with the changes that your engineers are making to the product, such that you feel more confident doing things in smaller, more frequent iterations. And that's one thing that you can minimize risk with a tool like ours versus doing these big 1 year, 2 year long rewrites, which of course carry a massive amount of risk.
So is it applicable more for startups that work more with open source software, and risk people should kind of ask this engineers to look at your software? Who are your most kind of customers of you? What are most of the job roles of your customers? Is it IT security people or InfoSec? What are they?
Yeah, we sell a lot to engineers on the platform team within companies. The platform team, if you're unfamiliar, really creates an internal experience for all of the product groups within a company. And the platform team really has like a holistic view of how permissions are working across an entire application suite at a business. We don't normally sell to startups. We normally sell to larger organizations, people who do actually have like risk management in-house and who are thinking about risk with every choice that they make. And the reason for that is that these larger organizations have just, they're feeling the pain the most because they've been through so many iterations of this, and they're like, I'm sick of it. I'm done, right? I want a solution that's going to grow with me and then I can stick in and that will be with me for the next 10 years.
All right. So can you explain the difference between authentication and authorization, and why both are essential components of a secure application?
Yeah, of course. So authentication is who you are. So if you're dealing with somebody on the other end of the internet, you want to know who that person is. And authentication usually deals with exchanging proof of who that person is for a secured channel back to that person. So proof could take the form of like, this person knows a username and a password, or proof could take the form of this person has access to an email address, or this person physically holds a two-factor authentication device. Those are all proof points. And authentication is basically summing up those proof points and making the decision, okay, I trust that the other person on the end of this line is Jake Moshenko enough to let them act as Jake Moshenko on my platform, right? So we in industry jargon, we call that auth-n, because there's authentication and authorization with a Z. So the other side of it is authorization, or which we call Authzed, which is, you know, the namesake of our company, Authzed. And authorization is, once you know who you're talking to, once you know who the person at the other end of the internet is, what are they allowed to do, right? I know I'm talking to Jake Moshenko. Should he be allowed to delete the Constitution of the United States? No, obviously not, right? Should he be allowed to create a document that pertains to Authzed's finances? Yeah, probably, right? Because I have a different relationship with Authzed than I do to the US government, than I do with, you know, Microsoft or Oracle or any of the other big companies. So It's splitting apart who you're talking to, and once you know who you're talking to, what they're allowed to do.
All right, fantastic. It's a good explanation for layman. So, can you tell us how modern authorization can reduce costs, and on the other hand, maybe how it can make more revenue for a company?
Yeah, reducing costs is pretty simple explanation. You just need fewer people to care and feed for the authorization code and machinery that you've written and that you're maintaining for your application, as well as it can reduce time to market, which can both reduce costs and increase revenues. So if you've got something right, like the amount of money that you spend is the integral under the curve of your salaries. And so by reducing time to market, that actually saves money, of course. But in terms of increasing revenue, you can get products to market faster. So if you've got customers who are asking for a thing, then being able to service them faster, of course, is money in your pocket faster. And you can also address things that you maybe wouldn't have been able to do. Earlier in the call, I mentioned that at Quay, we actually had to cancel features, cancel functionality because of our authorization system. So that's obviously just lost revenue, right? It's not even a matter of how long it would take. We just never even did it. And so if you had a platform where you were confident in the changes that you were making and you could get those to market faster, then that's obviously more money back in your pockets.
Fantastic. So I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What are the major misconceptions in your field of application or security, whatever your field is, that you kind of strongly disagree with?
Oh, that's interesting. What is the major misconception? There's one that keeps coming up. I don't, this is kind of deeply technical, but there are different classes of distributed systems in computer science, and one of them is strongly consistent, and the other alternative to being strongly consistent is eventually consistent. And in the authorization world, there are vendors out there who are saying eventually consistent is good enough. And I actually sort of strongly disagree with that, because we're talking about authorization code, right? It's like, imagine that you added somebody to a list where they weren't allowed to have access to the super secret sauce for your company. And at the same time, you went and you added more super secret sauce to a document after you had already revoked their access. You wouldn't want them to be able to get access to that because you're waiting for things to become consistent, right? You want the decisions that you make to take effect immediately. And so that's one of the things that I feel strongly about. Another one is that people kind of think that anything that says authorization on the tin is sort of like fungible, but there are different types of authorization that are specialized for different purposes. The last iteration of authorization that everyone was excited about were policy engines. So there was like Open Policy Agent, Caspin, there were a couple of pieces of software in that space. Those are great if you already have all of the data that you need to make your decision. But what we're focusing on is an authorization database where you preload it with all of the information that you need to make decisions. And then the decisions can come back much faster and much more consistently. And that's better for user-facing things or decisions that are made within the context, like within a broader context than whatever you have the information for right this second.
Right. Great explanation of what happening in your market, so our people can actually understand what's going on. So let us summarize our interview for someone who is listening to this interview and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways. What would that be?
I think that the major takeaways are you can be doing things faster and you can stick to your core competency by delegating permissions to a specialized service such as ours, such as Authzed. We've spent a lot of time thinking about this problem. We don't solve the problem in sort of the minimal way. We go beyond the minimal viable solution, right? We've got a tool suite that you can use. We've got a test suite that will help you have high conviction and that will help you believe that what you're shipping is secure and minimizes risk as best as possible. And so like you should get out of the business of spending time on this tricky problem and get back to your core competency of serving your customers the best way possible. And beyond just serving them, delighting them with fine-grained authorization experiences that will really kind of blow their mind that may have been a limitation in the past. To that end, to the amount that we've been thinking about authorization, we love to just talk to people about authorization. And I'd like to extend the opportunity for people who are listening to this call to come to a page, a specialized podcast page that we have, authzed.com/podcasts. And you can schedule a meeting and we can just talk through what you're doing. It doesn't even have to be like a sales call, or we'll just sort of give you an analysis about how are you doing permissions today? How is that potentially slowing you down? And how could you potentially be doing better?
Fantastic. So, Jack, those were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you some questions that you might feel important to our audience, please go ahead.
No, I mean, I guess from a risk perspective, we're a startup, and a lot of people think that doing business with a startup could be a little bit risky. Totally true. The counterpoint to that is that oftentimes startups are doing the most innovative, interesting things out there, and you can actually get a risk-adjusted reward by doing business with startups that makes it make sense from an ROI perspective. So yeah, I guess that would be the only last thing I would have to add.
All right. How long have your company been in the business already?
Yeah, we started in August of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh,
It's the best time to start a company because
absolutely.
there's no FOMO, right? There's nothing else going on. So it's just build, build, build all day, every day.
Yeah, yeah. It was easy to also, I think, to find new people because I think there were some people that left out of jobs, maybe.
Not so much in tech.
No, not so much. Yeah, because it was
Yeah,
our
tech kind of went crazy in 2020.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because of all online work, it was easy to still have work on online assignments. All right, Jake. Thank you very much for your very thoughtful interview, and we will keep in touch. I hope we can prepare some other podcast with you, maybe on some other relevant topic. And I wish a great success with your company, and keep in touch with Global Risk Community, and we will stay in touch with you guys in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.